The agenda is a bit different than usual because, of course, the second part is the most important. We've got some new faces, so I think it will be good maybe to say who we are. I'm Councillor Christian Allard, leader of Aberdeen City Council, and I'm chairing Community Planning Aberdeen.
Michelle Crombie, I'm the Community Planning Manager at Aberdeen City Council.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm William Hardy, Policy Advisor at Robert Gordon University.
Good afternoon, Jason Carrigan. I'm the Partnership Superintendent for Police Scotland.
Hi, I'm Kate Blake, Councillor Kate Blake.
Hi everyone, Matt Lockley, Head of Regional Opportunities at Scottish Enterprise.
Hello everyone, I'm Pete Edwards. I'm Vice Principal for Regional Engagement at the University of Aberdeen.
Good afternoon, I'm Gogo Carr for Aberdeen City Council.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thomas Boyle, Project Manager for Self-Assessment at the Improvement Service.
Afternoon, everyone. My name is Barry McLeod. I work at the Improvement Service.
Afternoon, Martin Murchie. I'm Chief Officer for Data and Insights at Aberdeen City Council and also Co-Director for the Health Determinants Research Collaboration Aberdeen.
Hello everybody, my name is Anthony Standing. I'm the Head of Operations for Skills Development Scotland for the North of Scotland.
Hello, I'm Councillor John Cook, although I'm not here as a councillor, I'm here as Chair of the Integration Joint Board.
Angela Scott, Chief Executive, Aberdeen City Council.
Hello, I'm Martin Gregg. I'm a member of Aberdeen City Council.
Thank you very much. So can we ask people online, please, come starting with Phil Mackey?
Hello, I'm Phil Mackey. I'm a consultant in public health and the prevention lead for the Health and Social Care Partnership. I'm also the Vice Chair of the CPA Management Group.
Thank you, Sarah. I think you're on mute, Sarah. No, still not hearing you.
Can you hear me now? Putting the tech in TechFest there, sorry. My name's Sarah Chu. I'm the Managing Director of TechFest, but I'm here representing ACFO, the third sector interface.
Okay, and we've got one new person who came in. You want to present yourself? Thank you. Thank you very much, Susan. So we'll go straight into the business, if you don't mind. Note that the meeting will be held in person with two parts in the agenda, as I said earlier. From 2 to 2:30, we'll take 1.1 to 4.4 on the agenda. To support efficient consideration of part 1, board members were asked to provide any question to relation to those items in advance of the meeting to enable responses to be provided fully to those. So far we have no questions received, but I'm sure that Michelle Allison and everybody else who prepared this report will be happy to answer any questions after this meeting. I see some nodding head in the room, yes. We'll be happy to do that. Very good. So we'll go into part 2 will be thereafter, 2:30 to 5 p.m. the self-evaluation session led by the Improvement Service by Thomas, and then we'll go straight to apologies. Who wants to give us the apologies? Go. Yep.
Chair, we've got 4 apologies from Councillor Radley, Richard McCallum and Duncan Calburn, and we've got William Hardy substituting for Duncan Cockburn.
Thank you very much. And our vice chair just arrived, Susan. Well, maybe you want, Susan, you want to say who you are to the new faces in the room? Thank you.
Hi, it's Susan Webb, Director of Public Health and Vice Chair. Apologies for being late.
Delighted to see you here today. Shall we go straight to declaration of interest? Any declaration of interest in the room or online? No, I don't see any. We welcome to our first meeting on understanding of SDS. So I think it's your first meeting at Skill Development Scotland. So thank you very much for attending. And I hope you'll find the board meeting very informative. And we've got our two colleagues from the Improvement Service, Thomas and Barry, who presented themselves already, who will take the second part of this meeting. Well, let's go straight to the minutes and forward planner 1.1. Board's minute of the 25th of September for approval is from page 3 to page 14. Is there any action completed? Are they all on today's agenda? Michelle, yes? Yes. Are we happy? Any question? No. Are we happy to approve the minutes? I did. Thank you. We've got the minutes of the 30th of October, and we are for information only. And no question on this? No. And then we have the one of the CPA board forward planner, page 35 to 36, again for information with reflection on future businesses known at this time. No questions. We're happy to approve all this. Then we go in the improvement program 2024-2026, 2.1. That's improvement program quarterly update and new charters is page 37 to 64. So I said earlier, the recommendation on page 39, we have 5 stretch outcome off track. If you have noted, as I said, there's no question in advance, but I'm sure Michelle and Alison will be happy to answer any question that you might have. Are we content to approve the recommendation as they are? We got a question, John.
Thanks, Chair. It question around particularly around the fact that we've got some new project charters. My question is, are we confident that what we've got at the moment is going to be deliverable at all, or might be delayed because of financial constraints? So, for example, one of the new charters is around recruiting people into jobs in health and social care. But in health and social care at the moment, to balance the budget for this year, we're looking at a recruitment freeze. So I suspect it's going to be the same in NHSG. So if the organisations in health and social care are having recruitment freezes, how are we going to get 25 people into jobs? There are external bodies that do that are involved in health and social care, but the external bodies are going to be hit with the employer's national insurance rise next year. So I'd be astonished if they weren't bearing down on recruitment. So it's just a question around is all of this affordable? There's a in Phil Mackey's paper on healthy weight, there's a great quote around the fact it's not about doing different things, it's about doing things differently. So if that's what we're looking at, I'll be more comfortable, but I just wanted to flag that concern, and sorry to be Cassandra or Private Fraser.
Chairing the IGB, it's important that you raise this concern. Angela?
That's a helpful point, Councillor Cook, and certainly these charters were agreed before the recent decision of the IGB. So I think it'd be helpful to go back around colleagues now in light of that decision to make sure that there's a sense around the continued value and benefit from those charters. So happy to take that, I think.
Yeah, can we take that as a management group, and particularly that a lot of them were delayed anyway in the list, as we have seen. So it's a valuable questions. Any more question? Any more concern? Are we happy with the recommendation with this little concern that has been shown? Thank you. So we'll go straight into the next item agenda, which is 3.1. It's Scottish Fire and Rescue Services Strategic Plan 2022-2025 stakeholder review, and you would have seen the proposed board response at page 65 to 70. We've got Phil Mackey online. Do you want to add anything, Phil?
Not really. The paper outlines the background to why we were asked to provide a response. The response is there. I think the one element that might be helpful is that it is acknowledged from people within the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service that there can be something of an interpretation gap between the performance reports in which they were identifying activities undertaken and how that relates to the outcomes. I think what is also clear from their response was that they would welcome an opportunity to seek closer alignment between the LOIP, both the current LOIP and the LOIP as it's redeveloped, and their strategic objectives overall.
Thank you very much. Yes, it was on the paper, and we value that closer partnership with our friend at Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. There were no question online. Oh, yes, Councillor Martin Craig.
Yeah, the report from the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service notes and admits that there is that there's that gap where evaluation is required, and that comes through repeatedly. And I just wondered if they have a solution, if they are working with partners to devise that reporting and evaluation methodology, because clearly it is very important.
Yeah, Phil, do you want to answer this? Thank you. You're on mute, I think.
I was indeed. I was wondering actually if Andrew from the Fire and Rescue Service wanted to answer that straightforwardly, but I do have a comment I can make.
Yes, it would be a good idea, Andrew. Sorry, we didn't see you early on. We didn't know if you were in the room. Go ahead.
Oh, that's quite okay. Thank you. Yes, there has been a slight disconnect in the past between the strategic plan and then local outcomes within the different local authority areas. We are addressing that within the strategic plan. We're looking how we can directly link it, and although the strategic plan can be quite woolly is probably not the correct word, but sometimes it is a bit vague. We are looking then to take the relevant outcomes and address that within our local fire and rescue plans for Aberdeen City and connect directly with council, boards, stakeholders, so we can provide that reassurance that what we are doing does actually affect and link into those local priorities. Also with our reports, we're looking to readdress the format that we produce. So again, there's more context behind our activity and again, how that links in. So we're looking to start that engagement early in the new year with a view to, once the plans are written, come end of spring into summer, then they're fully aligned. So hopefully that gives some reassurance around those points.
Thank you, Andrew. Phil, do you want to add anything?
I just wanted to come back and comment that we do actually have quite considerable expertise across Aberdeen City, both within public sector organisations, third sector, and the universities, not least within the HDRC collaborative. So I think it's not for want of having a very welcoming opportunity from the city side, if you like, for the fire service. Perhaps we should explore how we can become an exemplar for how this could work elsewhere in Scotland.
Yeah, brilliant. A closer relationship. Yes, Councillor.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I'm really grateful for that feedback from the fire service. I think there's an enormous amount of transparency and honesty in what they're reporting here. I mean, we all recognise that it is a very large organisation and the strategic plan is obviously very high level, but getting that localised understanding of impacts of operational activities is important. So further, maybe partnership work. I think that's very encouraging. If we have some way of finding out about the best practice and performance monitoring and so forth, and sharing that, I think that's a good example of partnership working. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for this. So we are happy to approve the recommendation, which were on page 65, to approve the proposed CPA response to SFRS Strategic Plan 2020-25 review, and this be submitted by Friday, the 29th of November, 2024. Agreed. Thank you very much. We'll go to the next one, which is 4.1. Aberdeen Health Research Determinants Collaboration Population Workshop Report. Report is for information only. Martin Mitchell, do you want to say a few words?
Thanks, Chair. Just conscious of time, so I can make it brief. It was a really successful, well-received event on the day with a good mix of people there. I guess the themes were some worrying trends in terms of population for the city, in terms of birth rate, migration, net migration figures, and obviously aging population, which is common across all places. And the theme I would summarize as, from that point, recognizing how important it is to keep focusing on the health and well-being of the citizens and making the city an attractive place to come to and stay, including migration. And we had some good sessions, including from Greg at that, talking about those issues. So in terms of follow-up and impact on that, Chair, we're conscious there is a range of activity right across the partners and the partnership ongoing, which touch on this explicitly. I think there was an acknowledgement in the room that there were some information gaps around just knowing exactly what the situation was and how some of these things could be better coordinated. So from that point, our aim is to engage through the OIGs and other governance mechanisms to try and influence going forward the decisions and projects that we've got.
I think it's important. I was at a meeting last night, a committee meeting, where Grampian Regional Equity Council was there, and Robert Gordon University as well were there. I think it's important to discuss this. Migration and aging population is very much part of our work. No question written, any question online? No, nothing online. Are we happy to agree? So it's not the report and the next step.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. 4.2 Healthy Weight Event Report, page 83 to 102. It's a report for information again. Phil Mackey, want to say a few words?
Really just to say the report is there. I would draw members' attention to the really very clear commitments that were coming through the report from a range of organisations, not just those limited to the CPA, but on a much broader basis. As a starting point for a whole system approach towards healthy weight in Aberdeen, it's been extremely successful, not just to highlight the issue, but to develop a very challenging timescale around moving us to a point where we are delivering on the back of extremely good work that's already gone before across the city. So happy to take any questions or comments, though I do thank John for his kind way of picking out one of my own kind of bon mot within the report earlier.
Very good. Yes, Councillor Cook.
The check's in the post, I take it.
I just want to say that as a committee meeting last night, there were an agenda about the healthy weight to present the population, and I think that's important that we disseminate that with third sector organization and from what our services. So the recommendation for action is a member of the board knows the report and the outline timetable for further development for the Healthy Weight Aberdeen initiative, and that a further report will be submitted on proposal arising. So I think we'll have time to discuss that at a later date. Are we happy to agree the recommendation? Yes. Thank you very much. So we go to the next one, which is 4.4, date of the next meeting, which is definitely the 27th of March 2025. All happy with the next date meeting? Yes. So if you're all happy, we'll go straight into the I'm 4 minutes early. The self-evaluation session laid by the improvement services. So it's up to you both. I'll leave it to you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. So hopefully. It's all muted. Tentatively pushing the mic. Oh, still. Okay. I'll leave the call and just speak through. Yeah. Right, that was a bit strange. Seemed to get a strange echo there, but okay. Well, many thanks for inviting us along today. My name is Barry McLeod, and I'm the program manager for all things self-assessment at the Improvement Service. And I'm here today with my colleague Thomas Boyle. Oh, bless you, Thomas. So hopefully you can all see the slides on the screen. What we're going to do is basically we're going to present the findings back from the checklist that you all completed. I think it was in August. If you remember. Oh, right. Okay. How's that? Is that better? Okay, so if you remember, the checklist was distributed to the board in, I think it was roughly August. So there was 6 sections and about 40 odd statements that you all completed. So many thanks for that. And what we've done in the meantime, back at the Improvement Service, Thomas and I have been analysing that information. And here we are today to present back the findings from the checklist. And first and foremost, I should say it was a really positive self-evaluation. So you'll see from the figures when we go through them, lots of positives going on. But as we say with any self-assessment, we've asked you to identify not only strengths, but also areas for improvement as well. So we'll be going through, some of the areas that you identified in the checklist. But just a little bit of background first for those perhaps who haven't worked with the Improvement Service before. And we are the National Improvement Organisation for local government in Scotland. In terms of the work that Thomas and I do with our teams, we work with councils putting in our self-assessment framework called PSIF, the Public Service Improvement Framework. And as we stand just now, about 2/3 of councils use this approach. So that was the approach that you went through with the checklist and the session that we're doing today. But also in terms of working with community planning partnerships, over the last few years, over half of community planning partnerships have gone through these self-assessments. In terms of what we're going to be doing today, working through, feeding back the findings, having some group discussion. And then at the end of the process, hopefully, fingers crossed, we should have a draft improvement plan at the end of the session, the end of the 2.5 hours, and Thomas and I will take that away and write it up and bring it back to yourselves. But I'm conscious there's a number of organisations, particularly from health and social care, so it's worth pointing out that we do a number of self-assessments with integration joint boards as well, also public protection committees, adult protection and child protection. So in terms of the agenda for this afternoon, we've got 2.5 hours. So basically we're going to be going through some of the main findings, as I said, but then very quickly, once we've set that context about the areas that you've identified yourselves in terms of where you think things are working well with the board, but also some of the areas that you've identified for improvement, we'll then go into a group discussion. And we're going to look at 3 areas, Thomas, that we're going to be looking at. We'll spend 10 or 15 minutes discussing each of these areas. And then we'll basically move on to a prioritisation for about 10 minutes or so, whereas having had that discussion, we're looking at 3 quite chunky areas that you've identified, and we're going to ask you to pick basically the 2 most important ones as you see it. So we'll do a little bit of Mentimeter and a bit of voting on that. And then after a short break, we'll come back and do some improvement planning on those two areas and look to get a number of areas like actions, risks, timescales, who's doing what measures, all of that good project management stuff, which will hopefully take us to the end of this afternoon. So if we can go to the next slide. Okay. So basically the process, as I said, we had some scoping discussions with Michelle and Alison over the summer, discussed how we were going to be approaching this. The checklist itself came out to all of you in August. You completed that. We've been doing the analysis back at the Improvement Service, and here we are today doing our consensus and improvement planning session. The end point, which will be the output of the process, will be the draft improvement plan. As I say, Thomas and I will kind of write that up and pass it back to the board for sign off. You can go to the next slide, but before we get into some of the kind of facts and figures that came out from the Likert scales and the text itself, I think it's, as I said, it's worth going through some of the strengths that came out of the process itself. As I said, there was kind of 6 areas that we looked at. So here's some of the comments that came back from some of the most positive sections around about leadership and governance and accountability and how the board is making an impact. And the first comment there is, if I'm just trying to read it there, my glasses can't see that far, the consistent commitment to the LOIP outcomes over a significant period and the alignment of single agency plans where possible to the LOIP shows constancy to purpose of the CPP. And the LOIP outcomes flow down into all partnership plans, for example, the alcohol and drugs partnership plans and the integrated children's services plan. And just talking about strengths, when we were going through the kind of LOIP and all the material on the website, I think it was worth pointing out, I should have really put this down as a strength, because the website itself is absolutely fantastic. And we work, as I say, with many CPPs. Some of them don't actually have the websites to illustrate the work that you're doing. So your one is fantastic. And I just took it as an example in one of your stretch outcomes, one of your 16 stretch outcomes, number 11, to reduce the rate of alcohol and drug related deaths by 10% by 2026. When you go down, you can click all the little bits and there's case studies and examples, and it's really fantastic. So well done for that. And the second strength coming round about governance and accountability. This was seen as a strength by one of yourselves, that the governance of the partnership improvement activity is particularly strong both at board and management group level, as well as within the outcome improvement groups as well. And another comment round about the LOIP projects having a robust reporting mechanism. I know this is all going through a kind of refresh just now, so hopefully what's happening today will be kind of feeding into that process as well. And finally, the section round about how the CPP is making an impact. And again, we thought this was a really strong quote from one of yourselves that acknowledged that you've got a solid foundation of working together and the relationships we have formed are the basis of change and trust. And these are necessary conditions towards making an impact for the people we serve. So that was a number of the strengths that emerged from the checklist. We'll be kind of sharing that, and I think we have shared it with Michelle, so you may have had an opportunity to have a look at that, and you can see all the qualitative comments at your leisure. But I'm now going to pass over to Thomas, who's going to talk a little bit about the national project that we're doing across CPPs.
Yep, thanks, Barry. So yes, as Barry mentioned, in the last few months, we've launched a new national community planning self-assessment. So 20 community planning partnerships are participating in this self-assessment, and they're going through the same process that yourselves are going through in terms of completing the checklist and the facilitated session. So that national checklist closed last week with 206 responses across the 20 participating community planning partnerships. So we're really happy with that. It's a great kind of evidence base that it's provided us with. Obviously yourselves, you undertook self-assessment a wee bit earlier to fit in with your current review, but your results will still be feeding into that national self-assessment. So moving forward, the plan is that we will analyse the findings of this national self-assessment at the Improvement Service, and in January we're going to look to publish a national overview report. So this will highlight what's working well in community planning across Scotland and also where there's common themes in terms of areas for improvement. So the plan moving forward will be that we'll then use this information, so the good practice, to identify case studies of what's working well, and from those case studies we'll be sharing them with community planning partnerships across Scotland to hopefully share learning. Also, in terms of areas for improvement, where there's common themes, we're going to look to use the Community Planning Managers Network to work on those themes together. And so we can look at how across Scotland we can look to improve on those themes around about improvement. And then just finally, national organisations such as ourselves at the Improvement Service will be using the findings from this self-assessment to help further develop our offers of support to community planning. So that's just a bit of kind of context. I'll go on in a second to show you how your kind of scores compare in the national self-assessment. So for your individual community planning partnership self-assessment, the scores should be appearing any second now. There we go. So as Barry said earlier, it was a very positive self-assessment across the 6 areas of the checklist. So for clear leadership, for example, you scored 74% level of agreement in terms of the statements within this section, 13% disagree and 13% don't know. So if you remember, when you completed the checklist, there was a number of statements within each of the sections. All we've done is collate the scores from each of these statements to give us that overall picture. And so in terms of clear leadership, participants scored the partnership well in terms of strong and effective leadership, as well as partners working together for a shared vision. However, the kind of statement within this section that had the most disagreement was round about all partners making significant contributions to the work of the partnership. In terms of governance and accountability, again, 74% agree, 14% disagree and 12% don't know. Barry has already highlighted some of the strengths within this area, and actually 2 of the kind of statements within this section were the high scoring in the full checklist. In terms of the lower scoring statements within governance, this was round about how members constructively challenge each other to do more at meetings, and that's something we'll come on to talk about as part of the group discussion. Community engagement, that scored 69% agree, 13% disagree and 18% don't know. For this section, the participants scored the partnership particularly well in terms of getting input from communities to influence the LOIP, and also a commitment to community capacity building and empowerment. The area, in fact, in community planning, there wasn't any particular area where there was disagreement with individual statements, so that was quite positive. In terms of effective use of joint resources, although it looks lower than the other sections in terms of 61% agree and 18% disagree, this actually is some of the best results we've saw for effective use of resources across the 20 community planning partnerships that have undertook the national self-assessment. This section always scores very poorly, so 61% is one of the highest scores we've received in this section. In terms of the statements within this section, participants said that they can evidence that partners share or align resources for joint projects. However, there was disagreement amongst participants in terms of all partners contribute funds, staff and other resources to improve priority outcomes. And then finally, the last 2 sections, so report of performance management, 68% agree, 15% disagree and 17% don't know. This section scored really well in terms of having an efficient and robust system in place for the recording of progress. And also, as Barry said, your public performance reporting scored really highly as well. The disagreement in this section was round about how this performance information is then used to facilitate constructive discussion at board meetings. And again, that's an area we'll come on to in a second. And then finally, how the CPP is making an impact. 67% agreed with this, 13% disagree and 20% don't know. So for this section, the positives were round about by working together, the partnership has delivered improvements which cannot have been delivered by individual organisations, and also that the partnership can demonstrate that it's been effective in delivering outcomes. The higher level of don't knows in this section was round about whether the partnership can evidence that its actions is facilitating the shift to early intervention and prevention. So that's the overall set of scores. But as I said, we're undertaking this new national self-assessment. So we're able now to kind of compare the scores across Scotland. So as you'll see on screen there, as I said, it was a very positive self-assessment across 4 of the 6 areas. You were above the average of the 20 CPPs that are participating, particularly in governance and accountability, 10% more, 12% more use of resources, and again, also quite a bit higher in making an impact. For the 2 sections that were lower, they were only ever so slightly lower. So clear leadership was 74 compared to 76, and community engagement was 69 compared to 72. So overall, across Scotland, as part of the national self-assessment, the partnership scored really well across all sections of the checklist. In terms of individual statements, we've just pulled out the 3 high scoring statements from the checklist. So statement 9, the partnership has a vision and strategic direction which partners are committed to. Everyone that completed the checklist agreed with that, so we had 100% agreement with that. The partnership has strong and effective shared leadership, 91% agreed with that. And then the partnership has appropriate structures and processes to support shared effective decision making. Again, 91% agreed with that, so all very positive in terms of those statements. The three lowest scoring statements within the checklist are the areas that we're kind of going to be focusing the group discussion on. So the lowest statement in the full checklist was statement 11. Members of the partnership offer constructive criticism and regularly challenge each other and the partnership to do more to achieve better outcomes, 36% disagreement. The second one, statement 26, the partnership can clearly articulate its collective performance expectations regarding necessary steps to reduce inequalities within and between local communities, also 36% disagree. And then that third one, statement 6, all partners provide leadership and make significant contributions to the partnership's work. So those were the three lowest scoring statements within the checklist, and those are going to be the basis for the group discussions that we're about to move into. So as I said, we're going to have a group discussion around the three of those. After we've had a group discussion about each of them, we're going to get you to vote on to prioritise the three of them, and we'll work on an improvement plan in the second half of the session for the top two. So just before we go into the group discussion, it was really just to see if anyone had any thoughts on the scores, if there was anything there that kind of surprised you, or if it all kind of sense checked.
Yeah, could I just ask about the quantity of responses that you received? Was that a sufficient average kind of volume to give you enough data to form conclusions? And maybe does that compare with the other community planning partnerships in terms of their responses?
Yeah. So we received 11 responses, I think, out of 14 the checklist went to. So the response rate for the national self-assessment was about 50% from all the other 20 community planning partnerships. So you were well above average in terms of the response rate for Community Plan Aberdeen. So we thought it did give a really good evidence base for the self-assessment. No other questions? No, okay. In that case, then we will move into the group exercise. So as I said, and you'll have seen in the agenda, we've 3 areas for improvement for discussion today as part of the group session. So the first area for improvement is look at ways the board can more effectively scrutinise progress towards achieving LOIP outcomes, such as time set aside for challenge, discussion, how performance information is presented to the board, etc. So in terms of the checklist findings, as I said, statement 11, members of the partnership offer constructive criticism and regularly challenge each other to do more to achieve better outcomes, was the lowest statement within the full checklist, with 36% disagree. And then just one example of the comments that one of you left was, with the large range of projects being delivered, there's little challenge from partners that these are correct or delivering fully. This is in part due to the large amount of material that needs to be gone through at meetings. So Barry, do you want to take the discussion?
Okay, thank you, Thomas. So yes, we just felt it's an opportunity to get your feedback on these 3 areas. As I say, we're kicking off with the first area Thomas just mentioned there, and hopefully you can all see that on the screen. Thomas is going to take a few notes, but it's just to throw it open to yourselves. Does this particular improvement action speak to you? Do you think this is something that you feel you'd like to take forward into the improvement planning? Any thoughts? Please just come in. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, happy to start. I think we had that discussion with our new vice convener about the level of what's presented to the board. It's the level of information far too much, well, far too many for us to be able to give them the time and attention that we would want to them. So it's more hit and miss. So, you know, I think Susan can back me up maybe on that, trying to find a better way to present to the board, maybe filter a little bit what's more important coming from the group.
Thank you, Chair, and I think that kind of reflects the comments that we had back. Any other comments round about this area? Thank you.
So when we've been doing the LOIP review, one of the things we did identify is that some of the LOIP outcomes are incredibly ambitious, and we would struggle to deliver within the time frame. So actually seeing any meaningful improvement within a year would be highly unlikely. So I think there's a bit of a mismatch, so a bit further work to do to be clear about setting outcomes that are ambitious yet deliverable.
Yes, thank you. I mean, I think we'll probably be discussing that particularly in the second area about setting and clarifying performance expectations. I mean, it's great to have all of those targets and things, but you know, do you feel you're impacting on those areas? So that's really for yourselves to discuss. But yes, any other thoughts on the first area? Thank you, Nika.
Just to mention that there is a considerable volume of information involved in scrutinising the LOIP activities, the projects, the outcomes, and so forth. So that point about setting time aside, but also I think it would need to be kind of organised, supervised or managed kind of time. I think it would be helpful. I don't know how, but to have some kind of support to help us to ask the right questions, to get into the to get into the detail, because there is so much, and there's so much positive activity going on. Sometimes it just feels quite a challenge to work out what, you know, what are the outcomes, where are you making a difference, particularly when you're dealing with different localities, different contexts, and such a wide range of improvement areas. Wasn't really an answer, but that was just my thoughts. Sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, some of these areas are so large and almost like the basis of a PhD on their own. So it may well be that, you know, if this is chosen to go forward, it might be one of the actions. Do we need to dedicate some development time around about a specific area to really get into it? So again, that's for yourselves to think about. But any other thoughts? Does that ring true, Chair?
I know that nobody talked about that, but on challenging each of us, I think it's a bit challenging to challenge one another because we are all willing partners, and we are very positive on the way we're moving forward, despite the fact that some of our aims might seem unreachable, especially in the timeline that we are given. But I'm not sure I will find a way to challenge one another without having pointing the fingers or trying to discharge some of our own responsibility for our whole organization into another organization. I think that doesn't go well with partnership. So how do we get that partnership working together, but at the same time being honest to one another or where we at?
Thank you, Chair. And maybe, yeah, absolutely right. It could be the challenge seems a bit pejorative. It could be it's more about expanding the opportunity for discussion round about the area and accepting perhaps it needs to be looked at in a bit more depth than perhaps you have at present. So, sorry.
I guess one of the things for me is because, and it does come back to the amount of information. I think it's understanding something, sometimes remembering all the linkages between things, because you know you have a lot of 16 stretch outcomes, there's 97 aims or something like that, plus all the projects that sit under that. And I personally find that quite hard to connect them all up. So it's not just the amount of information, it's making sure you're kind of connected. And I know a lot of them do interconnect, but it's getting that connections, I think, in my head sometimes.
Thank you. And you come.
Yeah, just again on the issue of challenge, I think the volume of information is a challenge in itself. And I wonder if when I look at all the projects, there are some of them where I think I know quite a lot about this subject, so I'm more willing to challenge. There are some where I'm really not very familiar with this area, so should I challenge at all? I actually think on any board you will have effectively non-exec directors who are there as, if you like, lay people, and I think I was going to say I think we should be encouraged to challenge on areas that we don't know much about, even if it makes you look at a bit of a daft laddie asking the question. I mean, I think the papers today, for example, I've found eminently readable and understandable because it's plain language. But I think that's, you know, maybe something we could look at.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and I suppose it also gets back, well, you've got, you know, your 16 stretch outcomes and all of that. It does take me back kind of pre-LOIP when we had the single outcome agreement. And I suppose one of the reasons we shifted from single outcome agreements was there was so much that were in them, and it was thought, can we condense it down into lumps and fewer areas to have more impact? But of course, but beyond that, once you're getting into kind of 16 stretch outcomes and in 97 areas, you know, obviously for very laudable reasons, but it may be a chance as you're kind of looking at refreshing just now, is there an opportunity to maybe bring some of these together or refocus it entirely for yourselves? But certainly that was kind of reflected, I think, Thomas, in some of the comments that were coming back. Thank you, Indika.
I guess it's just building on that. You know, you mentioned the word depth before. So when I've been involved with things like this before, it's like thematic discussions are good, where you look at a real in-depth deep dive on a particular topic or group of topics together. So that helps people who are maybe not necessarily as au fait with the topics. And I think it allows people to collaborate more because they can sit with a bit more in depth. You can find ways in which you can maybe contribute to the discussion, which if you just gloss over it and it's like tables of charts and red, amber, green things, you're not really fully understanding it. So I guess the thing is more an in-depth thematic discussion with topics together based around a broad, you know, theme. That's what I would say. And that's why I think it works, because I think the answer here is it was the challenge thing. Yeah, I get that, but it's about how you bring people together to collaborate. And I think the big problem that I've seen being involved with a few community planning partnerships is people don't know how to contribute. You know, I'm skills, but I can contribute in other things, I think.
Thank you. And you come.
Yeah, and I think just to underpin, we are, as a partnership, there are some very dominant organisations, and quite rightly because of the impact. But I think as a group, in terms of collaboration, if you're one of the smaller organisations, we might be doing a lot at a lower level. But it sort of, as a board, it's kind of to understand how can we have those discussions so that everybody can understand, is there more I could do in another part that is not quite clear? Because we do spend an awful lot of time on information sharing, and I know it's really important, but sometimes if we're almost just repeating the papers, that becomes kind of a challenge if you're not, or your organisation isn't really part of that. So it's just a challenge of how we get more collaboration in the room and more discussion, as opposed to information giving. And I think to the point around some of the targets, you know, we kind of revisit them, and you do sit there thinking, well, I'm not sure that I can contribute anything, and is it worth spending that much time when we are looking much more long term?
Yes, thanks for that. So it may well be, yeah, it's the opportunity for more depth and discussion, and it might be different areas that you're not quite aware of, but if you've got more of a chance to discuss it, it might be an opportunity to think, well, maybe our group can come in because we hadn't really considered that before, because it hadn't been expanded in that amount of depth. So, you know, so again, it's for yourselves to consider if that's something that you might want to take forward, and it might involve, you know, a wider range of partners in the board and some of your outcomes. But okay, shall we move on to the second one? Thomas, do you want to do that?
Okay, so the second area that we're going to be looking at is look to clarify performance expectations of the board regarding the steps to reduce inequalities within and between local communities by reviewing the number of projects, level of innovation transformation to ensure the partnership is having the greatest impact. So again, in terms of the Likert scale statements, we had statement 11, members of the, statement 26, the partnership can clearly articulate its collective performance expectations regarding the necessary steps to reduce inequalities, and that had 36% disagree, so the second lowest statement. And in terms of comments, someone said the LOIP has too large a number of projects being delivered within it, dispersing the efforts of each of the groups. clearer leadership around 2 or 3 large, meaningful cross-organisation projects could eliminate this and have a large impact. For example, if we delivered intervention in one locality centred around a range of offers such as employability, poverty, health, drug misuse, etc., then we could collectively have a greater impact.
Okay, thank you, Thomas. And you can see that kind of bleeding a little in from the first one into that as well. But I think these were reflecting the 3 lowest statements, were they not? So any thoughts round about this one? Thank you.
Yeah, well, there's a thought forming in my head. I think it is important that each organisation has got a clear understanding of its commitment to those principles, particularly on health inequalities. I think it's really important that that remains our top priority as a partnership, as a community planning partnership. But that also has to form part of the self-reflection of each organisation, part of their, a core part of their identities, tackling health inequalities as a principle, as a key policy, the core policy of each organisation. So that would give commonality of purpose, so that when you're dealing with individual cases, local communities, you're always applying that high level strategic view. And if we share it if we share that view as a partnership, then that gives the consistency and the coherence of our towards our joint working, so that we can, if each organisation is constantly referring back to that policy, and we would do that through the HDRC, and we're doing that through the work on Marmot. If we're doing that, then that will help us to ensure that we are making an impact, as long as we have a robust performance monitoring system in place.
Thank you. Any other thoughts?
I don't think we probably spend enough time at the board in the focus on localities. So I think that within the projects that we do attempt to identify what's citywide and what we're going granular on. But the point that colleague from SDS was saying, I think there's scope to lift those projects out and start looking at them as a collective then across the lens of the localities. And we know the areas that we are focusing on, in particular through the Marmot sort of success on that we're going to focus on 2 particular areas. So I do think in terms of that focus on inequality, we could do that more. Just to build on Councillor Gregg's perspective, and I guess your descriptor there of the Fairer Scotland duty, I don't think that actually as a set of individual agencies that we come into the CPP describing all that we are doing around the Fairer Scotland duty. I don't think we do that. I think we come here assuming that everybody's got the focus that Councillor Craig has described and that everybody's activity is going towards that. I've never had to demonstrate that to the community planning partnership. I'm not sure NHS Grampians had to do that either. So there is something around, we're making assumptions that everybody has got that alignment through the single agency, because fundamentally the LOIP has fundamentally been about trying to tackle inequality, but we're not curious about what each single agency is doing and then the contribution that makes, and then the additionality that we then seek from having the integrated activity of the partnership. So we have attempted to create a golden thread between each organisation's local plan and to the LOIP, but we're not curious about that as a board. And I do think there's an opportunity to spend more time in understanding that, because I think that's where the critical challenge will come in. And actually the opportunity to explore, is there something more that we could be doing together? And I think we need to, if we want to have more of the collaboration in the board meetings, then we have to find a way to facilitate that. And I do think having some sessions where we're curious about what each entity is doing and its contribution to the fairer duty would be then helpful. It might unpack opportunities. And I don't think we spend enough time on the locality plans for the areas that have got the most deprivation, and we're not looking at the improvement activity we do, although we're identifying it. The point that was made in the feedback, we're not clustering that together and then looking at that in the time series of the change that we're trying to work towards. So there's something more I think we could choreograph, Barry, around that.
Yep, thanks for that. Chair?
Yeah. Following to us, I think with the vice chair, we did try. We had an offer from Scottish Fire and Rescue Services to have the meeting in their place. I think to focus on one of the organization is not a bad idea, to understand that. And we made the call for all the partners to think about doing this. And we might want to do that regarding locality as well. I think we might want to have the board going to a particular committee regarding some of the outcome we want to see, or we want to prove, or that the action of the board have delivered that it said it will deliver. So I think something we can think about, building on the first meeting that we had with one of our partners, seeing how we can do that in the future, and might also introduce having board meetings or sessions in locality themselves.
Thank you for that, Chair. Yeah, it does remind me of a recent session we had, Thomas, with Falkirk at CPP, and there was a discussion. And again, you know, everyone's encouraged to be open and honest, and they're kind of refreshing the LOIP and looking at the size of the board. But it was just interesting, one of the partners at NHS board, Lothian, were saying the truth was that they were going to have to go back, and they were at this kind of stage just now and really look at their strategic plans to see openly and honestly, are they really reflecting what they'd kind of signed up to do in the LOIP? And that was quite open. It was in the discussion. And again, I think it's, you know, something to be saying, is there an opportunity to be seeing, you know, what is happening with partners and their plans, and is it, you know, difficult though it is, but are they aligned, or how far are they aligned? And I don't think, you know, it's you know, in terms of partly the challenges that were, I don't think it's unreasonable to take that approach. Any other thoughts round about this one? Oh, please.
I think for me, there is something about how we balance our expectations around performance with community engagement. Because I think if we constrain, you know, if we go in with an intended outcome, then that's not truly shifting the power within our communities. So I think there is something about having a mechanism that allows us to capture learning and then be focused in on how we work together to tackle some of the issues. So for example, we've had a number of conversations, whether that is higher cost of living, whether it's healthy weight, what's come out from those working directly with citizens in communities is that there is a challenge around data sharing. There are challenges, ongoing challenges about short-term funding. There are challenges about increased demand, but not premises size to deal with it. There are challenges about when you're financially constrained, sometimes that works against collaboration. And we don't have conversations about what our staff tell us are getting in the way of doing the right thing. So I think where we're saying achieving LOIP outcomes, I would add to that some of the enablers that we, as senior members within our respective organisations, can actually do something about, which gets back to Angela's point, within the financial envelope that we're in, we need to work closer together. And so some of it is about creating conditions for change.
Thank you for that. You come.
I'd echo both those points from Susan and Angela. So that strategic curiosity helps us, or from Police Scotland's view, assess how we can add impact to the LOIP and the outcome agreements, because there's some within there that you wouldn't obviously think as primary police objectives. However, we have got large, we see a lot of people every day. We've got a large Facebook presence. We can communicate with a lot of people in a very quick period of time. So it's helping to that strategic curiosity, understanding how we can tactically and operationally contribute to the overall aims. And I think sometimes that is lost with the volume of sort of data and some of the high level conversations that we have. So.
Nico?
One other very brief point. In terms of reviewing our expectations, should there be more attention given to the community engagement group and the lived experiences activities? Because yeah, we have to co-produce with communities and not impose on them. So there. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of, other CPPs we've worked with, we've said, oh, we could maybe bring people in to discuss their experiences, particularly in health and social care in terms of lived experience, to which some other folk have gone, it might be quite traumatic, but there's other ways other CPPs are using like videos and things, so people don't necessarily need to feel that it's a massive anxiety, but they can still be feeding in their thoughts into the board.
Sorry, I was just chatting to Councillor Cook. The IGB is doing that, Barry. So Councillor Cook, you start every IGB meeting with a video, and you're trying to capture lived experience and staff experience. But you should share that.
Yeah. I completely agree with Angela and the point Martin was making around engagement with communities. I think the challenge is quite often when we do, actually almost invariably, when we go out to consultation, whether through the IJB or through the council, you get lots and lots of responses, or a higher percentage of responses come from middle class white people who live in the West End, who are some of my constituents. And it's when you look at the more deprived areas, you get a much lower response rate. So it's I don't know what the answer is, but it's just one of the challenges in engagement is that it's not wanting just to get the usual suspects who've got the time, the inclination, and the confidence to respond, and trying to broaden out the demographic who will respond to any consultation or engagement exercise.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah. When you say that the phrase "the usual suspects," it takes me back to my days of community councils when I worked for 3 years with Glasgow's community councils, and people go, it's the same people who are coming to all the meetings. How can we get out to them? Sorry, you go.
Yeah, so I think there's a real difference, isn't there, between consultation and true engagement, where engagement is that ongoing relationships with our communities. And as organisations working in this area, our staff work with people day in, day out. They hear stories day in and day out. And I guess part of where we would wish to get to is being able to capture some of that and being able to analyse it to bring insights back. So I wouldn't wish us to increase the amount of consultation, because I think we are going out with predetermined agendas. I would encourage us to have a conversation about, if we're truly wanting to engage, how best do we do that? And I think local authorities are clearly key around that. Elected members are out listening to constituents. So I think there's some really fantastic examples in the children's arena. There's fantastic examples within substance use that we've had feedback. Third sector are another key agency that are really important in taking this forward. So I think for me, I think we need to be really careful of our language in response to some of this. And perhaps one of the areas we need to work on is, what do we mean by engagement for empowerment? What would that look like? How might we need to change our behaviours? Because our organisations often determine things, and that shift of power is quite a challenge to deliver. So having conversations about it would be helpful.
Thank you. And you come.
Just to come back, actually, totally agree with what Susan's saying. I think there is a difference between consultation, which can sometimes be a bit of a tick box exercise, and engagement. And my comment on that would be, when I talk to the staff who work at the vaccination centre, I get a much better grasp of what's going on because it's not just go in, get your jab, go out. There are lots of other folk there, lots of other organisations, partner organisations, who will kind of grab people as they come in. So it's take every opportunity. So more of that, I think.
Just to build on that, we're not curious as a board about the CPP profiles across Scotland. So we're not actively looking at in the kind of family groupings, how we compare, and then getting curious about what other systems are doing to tackle inequality. We're not doing that as a board, Barry, and we're not looking, even if I came back to our localities where we've got areas of greatest need, we're not looking across them. So if you're coming back to that question around, looking at steps to reduce inequality within and between communities, we're not doing that kind of compare and contrast within Aberdeen, and we've not been curious to date around how we could use the CPP profiles that you lads host as well. So there's something in there. And just to build on Councillor Cook, that bit around the voice, colleagues within the management group have virtually visited Sheffield, who have built a whole sort of model around lived experience and bringing that voice into multi-agency arrangements. So that's an area that we're trying to explore a bit more around how we can bring that in quite a systematic way across all of the CPP activity. So that's something that we're exploring, that I think we could commit to potentially in a work plan, but we're not curious, Barry, we're not using those CPP profiles, I don't think, within the context of the board.
Thank you for that. And also in terms of, you talk about engagement and consultation, people think we need to get a strategy out, but there's all the third sector organisations, all that are already doing lots of that stuff. So I was thinking, how can we best use the people, food banks, all that stuff, people going and telling their stories, cost of living, all that kind of stuff that's there. So what can be done to kind of galvanise and bring that, as Angela said, not only within Aberdeen, but also what's happening across Scotland as well, and hopefully some of the work that Thomas is leading on in terms of the national project, we will begin to, hope for the first time, have an evidence base where we can see people are doing well in that area, and we will then get in touch and go, well, what is it you're doing and what can you share, so people can then make the contact, so we're not having to reinvent the wheel 32 times, and we can begin to see what's happening across Scotland. Okay, shall we move on to the third one, Thomas?
Yep. So the third area we kind of have touched on a bit in terms of the conversations that we've already been having. What was that noise? Can everyone hear me? Yeah. There's a funny noise there. So the third one that we have is consider ways that all partners can provide leadership and make resource contributions as required to the partnership's work. So in terms of the statements, we had all partners provide leadership and make significant contribution to the partnership's work. The third lowest statement in the checklist with 27% disagree. And also statement 22, partners contribute funds, staff and other resources as the partnership considers appropriate to improve local outcomes. Also 27% disagree. In terms of comments, someone said a more distributive approach with more consistency across all stakeholders would be beneficial. Someone else said, I feel that the CPP could possibly make better use of joint resources such as buildings throughout the area to help bring services to those most in need across the area while minimising cost. And then someone else said, greater effective use of resources may be possible by doing fewer things better. Barry.
Thank you, Thomas. So any thoughts in terms of this statement here? Thank you.
I have a prejudice, which is that it's much better to do fewer things well than spread yourself too thinly. I've always thought that, and it's always seemed to be the case in every organisation and every role I've ever worked in. And I think the other point around can we do numerous things in the same building? I mentioned earlier what's happening over at the vaccination centre. So we're doing that there, and then Sport Aberdeen have got a facility up in Northfield, but the Health and Social Care Partnership has a couple of rooms that they use for sessions up there. So I think co-locating different services in one building. It just makes complete sense to me.
Thank you for that. Any others, Chair?
Yeah, to come back to that, it's maybe I was going to raise that and the second point, but that's about the third point as well. It's a question of clarity. I think it's a couple of examples that John has given as well known, but we are maybe not as good as demonstrating this out there of what the board is influencing for all those things to happen. So there are many examples of that across the city of shared resources, human resources, building services, and we take them for granted because they are moving. And on the maybe it's a question of clarity. I think we should be maybe clear of what we are achieving and being better at demonstrating it. On the other point of the number of projects that we support, number of action that we do, I'm very much in favor of trying things, even if there is little chance of succeeding. I think we learn a lot more sometimes from our failures than from our successes. So I would really encourage us to still doing things which don't succeed and being taking that as a positive, as opposed to taking that as a negative. I think we should try and try again and learn from this mistake. So investing in this kind of action, I would be one of the one asking for us to continue to do so.
Thank you, Chair. And in a sense, a lot of the work that's been done in the LOIP and the stretch outcomes are a series of tests of change. So, and this is all relatively new. This is all doing stuff above and beyond of what the organisations are doing separately, and we're doing this together and we're trying lots of new things. But part of the evaluation may be of our refreshes that is part of this, that perhaps, as you suggested, maybe we're spreading ourselves a bit thin, possibly. I mean, once we did have a comment in one of our CPPs was we're covering so much a mile wide, but we're only 2 inches deep, was one comment. Now, that's obviously a bit unfair for a lot of the projects, but I think the point was, should we be focusing on fewer and more depth? But that's part of all exactly the tests of change that you're kind of undergoing. But any other thoughts, Chair?
Just to add on this, try to explain what I was trying to say, is I wouldn't want us to focus on the easy things to do, but making sure that we do, the most difficult to achieve, knowing that a percentage, the likelihood of achieving them are maybe small, but the work is very important to do that deep dive, and really we will learn a lot about it.
Thank you, Nikam.
Yeah, I think it's a very difficult question to address because the leadership contribution is kind of immeasurable. And then when we get onto the subject of resource contributions, well, you're getting into the risk of trying to calculate or estimate what is the level of support or resource that's being contributed, and you're getting into quite a risky territory because there's so much. I mean, the partnership exists and breathes through the trust and the goodwill of all the partners, which is so strong. You don't want to get into that territory of, calculating, getting down to the nitty gritty of you gave X and you gave Y. Whereas at the same time, I think we do want to achieve quality outcomes, instead of, to get that depth of delivery, which does involve calculating, gathering information and auditing what you're giving. So that may be something that's worth having a further think about. How do we calculate? How do we evaluate what each one is contributing? But bearing in mind that we're doing this as a positive exercise to foster and develop the partnership approach, not to bean count and that sort of thing. I mean, we're in extremely tough economic times, and so we do need to keep on pulling together. So just a thought.
Thank you. Can you come?
subject.
I was just going to build on Councillor Gregg and Councillor Allard, because Jason was in my eye as Councillor Gregg was speaking. Because again, if you look at in the downstream management of risk, I mean, Police Scotland and fire colleagues would put a huge amount of resource into that work when we're at the downstream. When we're at the upstream, with no disrespect, that's probably some other partners that are making the bigger contribution on some of the upstream. But as you rightly say, if we're a wee bit more radical, then in our thinking about the ideas for change, then there is scope for police and fire to be in different places. We've seen that with fire and police colleagues. So I agree with Councillor Allard. There's something about at the board level, as board members, or even as members of management group, you wouldn't be in any of those structures where Jason and I would be, where all that downstream work is taking place. So I'm thinking about the local resilience partnership. I'm thinking about the chief officer group for public protection. So I don't think the CPP gets fully cited on all of that downstream partnership activity that's going on. But Councillor Allard's point is around the benefit and the USP of this space should be upstream. And I think the tests to change could do with being more radical than they are. I think we're busy on a lot of activity, but a lot of it's pretty safe tests of change and not as radical as they could be. And I do think the CPP gives us as officers a space to test and trial things. That's the hope that the HDRC, that Marmot, with our success in there, can start to challenge around what those tests of change could be. There is a frustration around how long those tests of change take to get up. They were meant to be an agile way of experimentation. They're still not agile. So we approach them as if they're a big change programme rather than a test piece. And they fall away as soon as one member of staff from one organisation is no longer there. So there is something around, Barry, I think we've got to hold on to the experimentation that Councillor Allard is describing. We've got some systemic change programmes like obesity that we've got to start to manage. And so you can see as we go forward with the LOIP, trying to hold on to the best of the experimentation, maybe less is more, as Councillor Cook said, less is more, bolder changes in there, whilst we balance that bigger effort. But I do think we've got to find a way to show the strength of this partnership is the downstream as much as it's the upstream, because if we lose the grip on that downstream response, and I think that's where we're challenged now, isn't it? And particularly partners around, you want to make the investment in the upstream, but if there's less resource, how do we keep the downstream response going? So I'm just thoughtful about there's a lack of visibility. And Councillor Allard's point about the estate. So again, I think we've gone really far on that with police and fire. And I think police and fire colleagues would say we've gone as far now as we're going to go as an area and as a city in terms of co-location with partners on there. But there is opportunity now through the work of the City Council on 21st Century Library, how the library estate, the sport estate can all be really linked up from a prevention. And I think, again, colleagues are starting to try and work that up. So I think, Barry, there's something for us to bring. I think we are going in a direction of travel around resourcing. We're probably not at a point yet that we've been sort of socialising that into here, but I can see that as a direction of travel that we can go in.
Thank you for that. And you come.
Thanks, Barry. I couldn't agree more. Obviously, we've chatted sort of quite a lot around that. So there is a clear synergy between our Vision 2030, sort of our business plan for the next 6 years, our real desire to want to get more preventative and more upstream around a lot of the inequalities that we speak about. So as we design our operating model going into that business plan, is how do we maximise our contribution towards the LOIP as well and build that in. So in designing that, I'd be keen to get the board's ideas, views on our operating model and how we're maximising our contribution towards preventative. So yeah, I'd be grateful.
Yeah, and I really like the idea about, Angela, you're talking about being a bit more radical in tests of change. I mean, it was a project I was leading for the Scottish Government in 2009, was to test reablement, which you'll be familiar with. We brought it up from down in England. It was quite a lot of investment in Edinburgh, but basically it was to try to stop people staying in hospitals long, but it was quite a chunky bit of work, and not people were going, will this work, will it not? And it's now been rolled out across. So sometimes it just takes, it's the scale of it. Sometimes maybe something, a smaller test of change, and maybe something a little bit bigger, because you're trying to see that kind of, broader picture. And sometimes, it might work, it might not work, as you say, Chair. But if it does work, it can be rolled out across lots of areas, and that's leading into prevention and all of that. So, yeah. Any other thoughts around?
So agree with what you just said there. So agree. I think it's all related to what we've just been speaking about. So the leadership thing is about people finding a way to contribute leadership. Everybody's carrying stories within them. There must be a wealth of information in people's heads and experience in this room. And it's how do we best get that out to inform things, So, I could talk for hours about young people and aspirations and post-school destinations and equalities around apprenticeships. And I don't know, some people know something of that, but it's relevant to your job in the police. So if your guy's on the beat, I'm not saying you need to be like careers advisors on the beat, because they wouldn't be, but if they're talking to young kids who are just like up to no good and they're out of work, and they need to know that there's opportunities out there and who to speak to, for example, even on a basic thing, pointing ways to try and engage young people. But so I think it comes back to this more thematic learn. We're a learning community here. This is what it should be. And I think everybody needs to come here and leave more enriched with knowing stuff about things, whether it's their own subject area or other areas. And I think that we've got that within our gift. And I think that's the leadership thing, to create an education in this, grow everybody's knowledge around things. So I think it's stuff like that. And the strategic thing that you said before, curiosity, that's a brilliant thing. So sharing examples, right? So in all the organisations I've been involved with, the big thing where everybody falls down and everybody says you've got to do it is sharing good practice. Everybody says it's the thing to do, but it's like, how do you do it? So if people haven't got the will to do it, or they don't know how to do it, or they can't engage with it, it's not going to happen. Now, there's something happening in Shetland, which is quite exciting, right? I don't know if anyone's heard this human library test of change. I think it's quite interesting that. So the board's all signed up to this human library. So there's a story within everybody, and are we curious enough to hear it? Are we? So I think that's total upstream stuff. Sharing insights. I think it is, but it's about, I think you've got to really reduce what you focus on. And I think you should only look at projects that can't happen unless the partners work together on it. So, for example, in the Highlands and Islands, one of the big things there is around population, talent attraction. There's 1.5 jobs for every person living in the Highlands and Islands. I know Aberdeen's got a similar sort of issue, but whose responsibility is that? It's not one organisation. It will not happen that unless 10, 15 organisations all work together on it. So it's like an absolute humongous killer problem that. And that's one of the things that they're focusing on. So I think, and I'm saying this is my first meeting, I've no idea how many projects you've got, but it sounds like it's a lot. But I think it needs to reduce, like massively, or join them up or something. Anyway, continuous learning.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks. I agree with the comments that have been made about we need to make it easy and for us all to contribute. I think there's also something about sometimes our contributions are invisible. So I go to lots of meetings nationally around community planning. I'm consistently told health does not contribute. I disagree with that consistently, because look around the table, there's quite a number of people with health badges around, but we have done mapping of the contribution, and actually it's quite significant. What I would say is sometimes we've got the wrong people taking forward some of the projects. So I think there's something Angela's point about, we need to actively manage some of this within our own organisations, and I'm not sure we've quite got that right. But the point I was going to come in is sometimes we're always talking about new things. So we have got a commitment to tackle child poverty. We have got a shared plan around tackling child poverty. Yet nationally, some colleagues from PHS were saying, if we want to make a 1% change in child poverty rates in Scotland, we need to work with 10,000 families. And if we take that back, that would be around 400 families within Aberdeen. And yet we sign off a LOIP that's working with 50. And we employ hundreds of and thousands of people. We've got jobs. We need to change. We talk about vacancy freeze. Well, we've got apprenticeships. Is that really what we want to do? Train people up, then no jobs? So how are we deliberately changing the policies that we've all got that help us deliver the ambitions that we signed up to as a community planning partnership? So for me, there's something about actually it's the scale of our ambition. And I think we all need to look at, if we sign up to tackling child poverty, then how do we all give 100% to that? How do we change how our organisations work? And how do we make a difference, a meaningful difference to the population?
Thank you. Any other comments for this one? Oh, and you come.
Fascinating point there, Susan. So I'm thinking of my officers on the street now, those interactions with the people across the city. What's the one page or the highlights that my officers can hang their hat on in terms of the CPP? Because like I say, that there is a hell of a lot of data and we contribute a lot, but what is the one thing for those cops working in the locality that they can go, bang, this is what I want to focus on from a community planning aspect. How do I tackle the inequalities and really deal with the issues in that area? And that leads into some of the things that you mentioned there about pride in an area, because if they can focus their interactions towards a strategic objective around pride, or all of those inequalities, then each contact that they have is so much more meaningful. And I'm not sure that we've got that succinct brand or something that you can hang your hat on as an operational practitioner in those particular areas. And that's, like you say, you have so many of your health colleagues having those interactions. How does it all contribute to our sole strategic objective? If that makes sense.
Okay. Well, I think we've covered these areas of 10, 15 minutes on each. I mean, obviously we could spend talking about discussion all day talking about each one of these, but we are where we are. I think we're going to move on to, we've had a discussion and to think about a bit of voting to prioritise across these three areas. And let's see if we can narrow down to the top two. So Thomas.
Yep. So this meeting, that you'll be able to access Mentimeter to vote. If not, if you've got your phone, you can use the QR code that's on the screen, or you can just go onto ment.com and put the code in. Once you're on there, you'll be able to vote on the three priorities. You'll have 100 points to use. You can use them in blocks of 10. If you feel really strongly about one, you can put 100 points on that. If you want to go 50-50, completely up to yourself. But that way we'll be able to prioritise the three areas for the second half of the session. So I'll just give you a few minutes to go and do so. So we will be able to see the votes coming in. I think that's half the votes in at this stage. One or two more? Okay then, thank you all for voting. So in first place with 44% of the vote, we have clarifying performance expectations of the board regarding reducing inequalities by reviewing the number of projects to ensure the greatest impact. And the second one is look at ways the board can more effectively scrutinise progress towards achieving LOIP outcomes, such as time set aside for challenge, discussion, etc. So I think now we're going to take maybe a 7-minute break and back at 1:45. And we'll look at those two areas and how we take them forward as part of improvement plan. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, shall we reconvene, please? Maybe when tennis that'll be 20. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll run over a couple of minutes.
Okay, yeah. I know it's just, it feels like, is it one of these intelligent buildings where it's kind of, you're scared to open a window in case an alarm goes off or something like that, but yeah. Is it not? Yeah, you should be unintelligent buildings, yes, yeah. Yeah. Right. Fantastic. So we've done our vote, and now we're going to move into quite a practical improvement planning session. You know, I think we're just going to stick and do this as one group rather than kind of moving between floors and all of that. We'll just crack on. But if you can see the screen here, I'm sure many of you have done this type of thing before. We're going to go through this twice, maybe about half an hour or so for each one. We'll put the improvement that you've just voted on, the top two in the middle, and we're going to work our way round from the top right-hand side all the way around. But in true Blue Peter fashion, if Thomas moves on to the next one, what we're hoping to get to by the end of the afternoon is something that looks a bit like that. So we're going to kick off with box number 1 on the right-hand side. And what we're looking for is practical actions here to make the improvement that you've prioritised a reality. So we've got 6 there, but it may be 3, it may be 4. It's just whatever it is that we've got. So practical areas. And then we'll probably, with time being what it is today, we'll probably jump on to assigning an owner to each of these ones. So let's say we've got 4 or 5 actions. We'll be looking to assign an owner to that. So we'll go straight to number 4. And I think time allowing, we'll also go on to box 5 to look at the measure that will give some kind of indication whether that action has been done. And then we'll go and do that for the second one. And if we can pad in the other ones, if we've got time, that's fine. But I think these are the critical boxes that we can do, and the other boxes can be done later on. So Thomas, if we go to the first one. Okay, so the first one, clarifying performance expectations of the board. That was what, 44% voted for that, Thomas. Clarifying performance expectations of the board regarding, oh, hang on, I've disappeared from the screen. Regarding reducing inequalities by reviewing the number of projects to ensure the greatest impact. So it's over to yourselves. Can we think of a few practical actions to make this a reality? Any thoughts? Okay.
I guess the first bit before you get into reviewing the number of projects is the first part of that, which is about the expectation about the level to which we can reduce inequality as a CPP. So Susan's earlier kind of reflection about what the level of inequality is in the city and what level actually we want to commit to in order to do that. I think then the second part becomes easy, but it's, I guess it's back to the conversation about we have got 16 outcomes, because again we've followed the Sustainable Development Goals, we've aligned all of that. But if what we're saying is actually we want to get really focused on inequality, then that has to become a kind of clear statement about the outcomes that we're aspiring to and the level of improvement, and then therefore pieces of work are then judged against the contribution to that. But I think that whilst we say the outcomes are ambitious, I mean, actually in terms of the quantification of the outcome, then actually it's quite low, the ambition that's in there. So I think, Barry, the first bit for me is just around how we are going to clarify the expectation on the level of reduction of inequality, because I do think the second part is actually relatively easy to do.
Okay, thank you. And Thomas is just typing in here. If you think anything needs clarified, please just let us know. Okay, for a second action, any thoughts? Yep, then you come.
Is there something around working out what things are within our gift to collectively within our gift to deliver, and what things are happening in the external environment over which we've got no control. Does that make sense?
A kind of mapping of what you feel you can be doing and what you have control over,
Yeah,
and
it's
what you perhaps don't have control over.
Yeah, it's basically doing things like, well, you know, we could spend more money on social care, for example, and that is within our gift, although I'm not quite sure where the money's going to come from. But then if you look at things like fuel poverty, we've got no control. We've got no control. Nobody in this room could do anything about fuel poverty. I suppose we could.
Sorry.
Sorry. Well,
Yes, we can.
okay. Sorry. Yeah. Yes.
Mitigate.
Yes, we
not
can,
prevent.
but we
Yeah.
can't. We've got no control over pricing.
Yes.
Is
Yes. I know what you're
Yeah.
saying, but
I expressed it badly.
No. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Again, if you can just check what's going in to make sure. Yeah, so again, this is a kind of early stage thing just to kind of see, look, before we kind of commit to something that, you know, what is it actually within our gift to be able to achieve this. Okay. Third action, any thoughts?
I suppose we would need an agreed reporting and monitoring mechanism. Is that relevant? So we know what our targets are, what we're aiming to achieve, and whether we have succeeded.
Yeah, suppose you're doing your kind of refresh of your log just now, so it's an opportunity to look at, is this still achieving what we hoped it would achieve, or is it time to maybe park this one and put our capacity and resources elsewhere?
We have been selected for Marmot, and within that expression of interest, we identified 2 areas in the city that needed to be a focus in terms of inequality. So as we go forward, Barry, for the refresh of the LOIP, we're thoughtful around how that support that we will get from Marmot and UCL will, particularly again in terms of areas in the city that we need to reduce inequality, we know significantly 2 areas that we are prioritising. So there's something about how we would connect that up to the work of Marmot, I think.
For CPPs or IGBs we've been working with recently, they always benefit. So congratulations to be one of the 3 to be selected. So yeah, so to integrate it with that, to make sure the work is kind of linking into that would definitely make sense. Now, I'm not advocating you have any more actions, but any thoughts? But
I wonder, the earlier conversation we had about exploring learning from elsewhere and bringing it into the partnership is one that we would add to this list as well. Because once we're clear of the inequalities, understanding and agreed where we're going to focus, then it's going to be critical that we understand what evidence is out there that we then, and good practice that we might want to consider not adopting, but learning from locally.
yeah, and I guess given that Thomas is leading on the national project, because you know, to look at the work across the self-assessments across all the CPPs, because there really isn't a baseline. God knows we've tried to see if there's all that stuff there apart from us physically going in to CPPs. So there may well be in the report, which we're hoping to be published in January, and from that there's going to be another team in the improvement service to actually look at identifying a series of case studies and best practice of people that we know who feel they're doing well in particular areas. So there might be, I'm not saying it's the only route, the CPIB, there might be other routes to go in, but already Thomas is presenting, I think, is it the CPIB on
Thursday?
On Thursday, so I suspect they'll probably be asking what case studies can you but there may be others, but yes, fantastic, we can link into that. Any other actions for that, or do we feel that's enough to be? Start reviewing the stretch outcomes of the 97.
No, it's more of the aims of the project.
Right. So kind of review it again to be seeing, you know, if they can be pulled together or what's working or what's not, and I suspect you're probably looking at that kind of already in some of the areas, but an opportunity, do you feel when you say thematically to pull them together, perhaps a merge or something? Or? Yeah, yeah. And it may allow some kind of merging of some areas and perhaps some considerations that might not have happened because they're not quite au fait with what's going on. So absolutely.
I think it's like if you're learning from different people's approaches and you get a good thematic discussion, you can look at the impact potential. So here's what's been done, and here's been the impact of it, which is 0 to 4. So is there something there around, is that an action? Analysing, evaluating impact potential. So things that we've done now, what has it done? What has it achieved? How many people has it done? How important is it in the scheme of things, right? So it's down as a project. I think you could do that through that thematic approach.
I also just wonder, on the basis that we don't know what we don't know, how many activities are out there that aren't part of a project, but actually indirectly or more directly are impacting on the outcome of the LOIP, and somehow how can we capture more of what's going on, which might negate the need for some of the projects or to be brought into projects. Because I'm sure there are lots of organisations who are doing an awful lot to reduce child poverty, to improve health, but aren't necessarily part of the partnership directly. So I just think it might be a huge piece of work, but I'm sure there are things that are helping our improvement results that we can't claim necessarily to be directly as a result of the partnership.
I know. I do feel for the researcher that might have to take on that project. I mean, just we were doing some work with Children's Services and another at CPA. I'd even tried to understand the links with all the different groups. It's baffling, but it may be something to be thinking, because I suspect people who are in the stretch outcomes are by and large the experts in the particular areas. So if they're not aware of what's happening beyond that, I'm not sure. But, you know, it's worth having a think about to see if there's other ways of doing it. But okay, so how many have you got there, Thomas? I can't see that far. Right, okay, 7. Shall we move over to box number 4 and assigning an owner to some of these? And again, we're not going to die in a ditch over these things, but I think it's important that, you know, we don't walk out of here today and find it's going to the same people all the time. You know, we want to kind of share the ownership of taking these improvement actions forward. So the first one, can I move this bit closer? Increase understanding of the level of inequality across the city and what the board would hope to achieve to clarify expectations. So Angela's action round about this. Any thoughts who would be leading within the partnership in this area?
Let's going to think be DPH supported by the HDRC, then informed by the Marmot. So again, I think that that will allow us a whole load of knowledge and expertise to sit around all that. But Susan, you might have a different view.
Yeah, no, I was going to agree, because we've already got an inequalities dashboard that HDRC have led on development of, and also because we're connected internationally to work, Martin and Shantini here around the HDRC are working on metrics around how would you begin to measure the change in inequalities between healthy life expectancy, and there's lots of academics and things around that. So we've got a lot of work, I think, that we could pull together quite quickly around that. So yeah, happy.
Okay, thanks for that. Second action, maybe you could read it out, Thomas, because I can't lean over.
The second action was clarify what partners can and can't contribute to improve the outcomes identified in the LOIP.
So again, it could be an existing working group, it could be a new group to be formed. Is there someone kind of looking at this area already or has a particular interest?
I wonder, do we need to order them a little bit? Because there's something about understanding the level of inequality, then understanding where we want to focus. And I think further down, we talked about learning from elsewhere, picking up from Marmot, because that would then help us streamline. There's a bit of theming as well, would maybe come next. And then after that, then we would want to look at what we believe we can do ourselves as a CPP. But actually, there may be things that we want to try and influence national to support the work of the CPP. So I just wondered if that's just come a bit early to then say an X needs to do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily, I suppose, chronologically, it's just as the actions came up. But Thomas, you've shifted one, so the second one there is?
Yep, so the second one I've just moved up, just said about ensuring that the Marmot work feeds into this. So I'm assuming that obviously will have the same action owners as Action 1 then. So the next one is explore opportunities to learn from good practice elsewhere. Who would lead on that?
I think the chairs of the OIG groups would be the natural to lead that. And I guess that bit around professional curiosity, looking at other systems. So if we're going to do a review of all of the activity we've currently got, doing that against what other systems are doing, that naturally would be for the OIG chairs to lead that work, I think.
Yeah. And also some could be shared right about the national report as well, and that'll be feeding into the community planning network as well. The next one, Thomas?
Yep, so the fourth action was the action about mapping the work of the partnership against LIPE outcomes to improve understanding of how these projects contribute to the LIPE outcomes. So a mapping piece of work.
Michelle, have you not largely been doing that as part of the review of the LIPE?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's something that we do ongoing. So with the full scale review of the log, we'll review that again. So it's whether there's anything above and beyond what we would already have embedded into our processes to do that is lacking that we need to address.
Perhaps it's an opportunity if the work's already been done, but for the board to have a look at it and have fresh eyes at it and to be able to feed back to yourself to give you some input round about that.
The fifth action is clarify what partners can and can't contribute to improve outcomes. So the one we discussed earlier, but we moved it further down now.
I don't want to be as reductive as to say who suggested this one, but but who suggested this one?
And I guess that is the challenge about resources, isn't it? So Jason's earlier sort of point about what capacity we've all got, and then the deliberateness of what capacity can you release for some more upstream work versus your kind of downstream challenge. So I just wonder that needs to be all partners clarifying.
Yeah.
But maybe it's Susan's point, maybe it starts from that understanding about what the inequality gap that we want to try and tackle. Susan's point about understanding what everybody's currently doing, the value of what we're currently doing, and then the next bit starts to become about, and so in light of all of that, what do you think actually you can contribute? So I think that'll fall to all of us, but you can just see these a number of stages that we would all go through. And I guess the convenience, if you're reviewing your own operational plan at the same time, whether that's NESCOS or it's soft fire and rescue, then we could all then start to get that alignment based on what available capacity and capability that you have got. So I think that's got to be owned by all partners.
And as you say, the first 2 or 3 stages are done, that's going to begin to limit the areas that you're wanting to look at, and then to be going back and reflecting rather than trying to look at everything in the one go. You're going to naturally be focused on a few narrower areas. Okay.
But
Thank
maybe
you for
what
that.
we need to be doing, coming back to that professional curiosity about what each system is actually doing at the moment in its contribution to outcomes, I don't think we have a solid understanding of that at the moment. So maybe that's something that the board could be spending some time trying to understand.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair.
Let me add something to this, because we talk about themes, thematic approach. We are talking about reviewing contribution on everyone and trying to assign an owner to that particular things. I'm starting to be comfortable about all this, because I think it should be everyone. Why? Because if we take a thematic approach, or if we value people compared to the contribution, then we're going to start to value less some of the people in the room and others more. And I don't think it's what a community planning partnership should be about. It should be about having an equality of contribution within the board and making sure that everybody will find. So it's important, the outcome is important, everything is important of what we should do, but we should not lose anyone during that journey. So we have that responsibility as a board, as making sure that everybody is involved at every level. So we've got to keep that in mind.
Yeah, so I thought the point you made was slightly different in terms of looking at a particular issue. So if we pick a healthy weight, there are things that we absolutely won't be able to tackle locally, thinking of some of the national policies that are developed that have an impact on food, and therefore just being clear about that. And I think for me, the benefit of it's not that we don't say that we're not going to look at healthy weight. So some of the biggest interventions might be around pricing policies nationally, but actually there's still a role for local communities and local activity. And I think it's being clear about what we contribute. And then I think some of the conversations we have nationally is around the value of local within that whole system approach. And I wonder just if there is something about when we agree our priorities, we do look at the total evidence, but then be very clear this is what we would require national to deal with in terms of national policy development, and here are the things that it's within our gift to do. Does that make sense? Because I think that's a slightly different issue than what we are contributing to a particular issue.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that gets into one of the areas that we're looking at in terms of what can we do and what's beyond our gift. It may well be you can try to influence at a national stage and do what you can there. But it's also, I suppose, Angela's point about going through these mapping processes and begin to narrow it. It might not ostensibly look like your area, but having that professional curiosity to go, well, hang on, it might be something that what they're doing just now, but a bit more upstream, as it were, can we think, and just even if it's a question that you might go, no, well, we wouldn't consider doing that, but just to be posing some of the questions that emerge from some of the work that's going to come out there, I think might be useful in this process. But Thomas, what are we on to?
Yep. So the sixth action was the one about the report and performance mechanism. So agreed report and performance mechanism, what we want to achieve, what measures we can put in place, etc.
Now, again, I guess the more I'm looking at this list of different actions, it is almost looking like a chronological one. Stuff will be following, from the earlier stages. So they're not like sometimes we do, it's a distinct thing and it's completely, it may well be this one's coming from, you can look at reporting and performance mechanism and all of that, but it's only once you've seen what it is that once you've done your mapping. But even so, is there still some thoughts about who might be leading on that, or would that again be something for the board entirely. Any thoughts?
We do have a review of the LOIP due, so that is due for 2026, and we've already, through our group, looking at the results, have some thoughts about how we can respond to the feedback that we've heard today and we've discussed between ourselves. So the reporting mechanism is obviously a key part of that. But if there's anything that we can do with our existing reports in the meantime, we wouldn't want to have to wait for the board to get that kind of response, to wait for our LOIP in 2026. So we can maybe just do a bit more work, I guess, with colleagues to unpick how we can react and respond to the feedback on our current reports to make sure that we're highlighting the areas that you need to be aware of, but also the form will, of course, follow the full review of the LOIP.
Yeah, it's a slight catch-22 situation where people going to have a bit less
Yeah.
information and less, but then suddenly you're going to have new areas to be looking at. So that's just the complexity of what we're looking at here, because obviously you'll be reporting in some of the areas that's what come out, that mapping, etc., etc.
And we urge you to come back to the board with our conclusions of the review that we've been doing of community planning. So some of those will include some shorter term actions that we would recommend that we take, and longer terms looking to 2026. So can certainly take that to the next meeting of the board.
Okay, thank you, Michelle.
Back to the point that Councillor Allard made, partnership working has to have a degree of accountability in it. So the reports that we've had in place, because without it, so we can describe ourselves as a good set of partners in the fiscal environment that we're in, and the change in personnel that's taken place in the system, there wouldn't take much to tip the commitment to partnership working, particularly with fiscal pressure. And so it is important that this board acts as a mechanism for holding to account. I completely agree with a colleague from SDS about a learning culture, absolutely learning and being curious. But if there's not a vehicle, this board, where there's accountability for collective, then it is hard to work. It's hard to work to get your own system to deliver, let alone getting a set of cats to come together to commit, because that's what it is. We all have different accountabilities, and the strength of the CPP, in my mind, to date has been one vehicle where actually there is an accountability around what we're doing, and a reporting vehicle for that. So I know, I mean, it will be important for Michelle to get everybody's input about what have you found impenetrable about the reporting that's in place, because it is there to demonstrate the accountability, and without that, I would find it incredibly difficult as the chair of the management group to make sure that the activities and partners commit the resource, because we endlessly get pulled into 100 million other things. So we've got to find a balance between a more penetrable form of performance reports, but to allow the accountability, whilst also having space in the board that allows learning, allows curiosity, allows an exchange. And I do think that understanding what's going on in single agency, because again, we're all spreading jam. And the point you were touching on, Susan, for me, is a really mature CPP will be one that recognises it shouldn't spread a jam, that we shouldn't ask Police Scotland to do X, Y and Z. We should just allow the limited resource that Jason's got to concentrate on A, B and C. And that's where, given the fiscal challenge we're facing, that's what we'll need as a set of officer leaders in each system. Otherwise, we're just constantly adding and more. And so I think there's a level of maturity journey to go on around really understanding the prioritisation that's needed. And this board saying, how are you managing that downstream, your early intervention and the prevention, and that kind of focus on there, whilst kind of doing all your kind of core BAU. I think that's going to be important. So I would just ask that, I agree with Michelle, what we can't afford to do is to go through the LOIP renewal and then start tackling how you want reports to come to the board. So maybe there's some further sessions, Councillor Allard, where Michelle can do engagement with folk to get some more direct feedback on what's been, I know that there's a volume, but actually there's a level of graphic that's given to the presentation that, Michelle, I think you put personal effort into doing to try and make these more. So Councillor Blake, you saying that you can't see the connection. So I'm surprised by that, because I think in the format that Michelle has designed, so but I think spending more time to understand what would make that better will be important. Otherwise, we'll do the LOIP refresh and then we'll be months in trying to work out what the reporting, and then it'll be very difficult to get activity back going post the LOIP refresh. So I think there's just, in my mind, there's got to be a balance. Otherwise, I won't have, we'll find it quite difficult in the management group to get going. So just if, can we have some other space where we can get feedback on what the board's likes would be for what that level of reporting is going to need to look like? Because there's been a huge amount of effort put in to get to this stage. So getting feedback on that will be important, Barry.
You've got that in there, Thomas?
Yes, I put that in there.
Got that in there. Yep, you can.
Yeah, just again, one of the things I heard, and at risk of offending everybody, so I'll apologise in advance, but what I'd heard was there's something about what we need to do to ensure we're asking the right questions and what they might be. And I just wonder if we need to, because I think at the moment, how I heard the action described was it was about setting up a performance reporting template, and we'll tell you what we like. Actually, there's something about you telling us what you need from us as a board. Have we got the right skills? Have we got the right information? Are we all fully sighted? Because I think what we've said in the feedback is we haven't had that laser focus in on tackling inequalities as a CPP, and that's where we need to get to. So what support do we need as board members to balance curiosity with mobilisation and action?
Okay, thank you. Is there just one more?
Yeah, the final action was just that discussion round about the councillor had in terms of introducing that thematic approach to the aim sitting under the project. So maybe thematic discussions at board meetings. That was the kind of final action.
Okay, any thoughts who would be leading on that? Really? Yep, thank you. That'd be very helpful.
Sorry, what was your name again?
Anthony Standing.
Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. So will we move on to final box for this one, Thomas? Measures for these ones? Yeah.
Yeah, so the first action, the action round about increasing understanding of level inequality across the city and what the board would hope to achieve to clarify expectations. So there's something we can put in place to measure that in 6 months' time or a year's time to show progress has been made in that action.
So that was, I think that was your point, Angela, around about this, the initial piece of kind of scoping. Would this be just a form of report or something, or? Something that would deliver. So sorry, Michelle, can you come?
Sorry. I don't want to delay progress. A lot of these things we know that we want to do for the renewal of the LOIP, and one of the clear findings of the review that we will do is how we can have a more sophisticated approach to our population needs assessment, which I would expect to be the source of where that inequality is. So I think, we would progress with plans to develop that next year. I mean, to me, that would be the source of that kind of clarity of the inequality of the population needs assessment isn't providing that at the moment. That's an area to develop, but that's just my thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's the population assessment you feel some point next year, Chair?
maybe. It's what I was going to say. I think Phil Mackey has put, maybe Phil wants to tell us a bit more.
It was just an observation. It goes back to the point about the type of reporting. I'm thoughtful that we should be thinking a little more carefully about reports which reflect the differing levels of expectation, whether it's at the level of the performance of a particular project against its explicit aims versus reporting of the contributions that are being made towards the overall stretch outcomes. I think some of the way in which we're describing the overall approach is to think a little more closely about how we use the logic modeling that is already embedded within the LOIP and could become a much clearer tool for us to understand not only how we manage expectation, but how we set expectation, which is both contributing to the outcome as opposed to that which is ensuring that we're able to keep projects under closer scrutiny. It's an area I suggest I can take up with Michelle because I'm working with her on the review.
Okay, thank you for that. Phil, so we've got those comments in the chat so that can feed into Chair. And you come.
No, just to back up what I just said, setting as a politician, setting expectation is exactly what should be done. I think we have to be careful of how we're expecting our. When we need to set our expectation a bit better and having a better understanding. For example, we talked about that earlier, about the risk we are taking on some of the project, and that has to be in the expectations, that people do not think that we only looking for success at all price. So I think that discussion between Phil and Michelle is very important.
Thank you. You come.
Yeah, so for me, there's a couple of things in here, isn't there? Increasing the level of understanding. So that is the population needs assessment, but how we use that frequently so that it's embedded in all of our minds. And the second bit then is what are our expectations? So in my mind, it is, so we've got X inequality gap, we want to reduce it by Y, and that is the focus, that is the target, that is our goal. It's clearly, and we see it through all of the work that we do.
Thanks for that. Now, I'm aware that time is marching on and we do have a second area to look at. So I'm wondering if we're better, Thomas, perhaps shifting on to that and at least establishing to make sure to get as much as we can done and you make best use of our time to get a number of actions and who's going to be doing what on that one as well, because some of these other areas we can come back to and get filled in. So if we look at the second priority that the board voted on at 31%. Thomas, can you read that?
Yep. So the second action that you prioritised was about the board meetings. So look at ways the board can more effectively scrutinise progress towards achieving LOIP outcomes, such as time set aside for challenge, discussion, etc.
Okay, thank you, Thomas. So again, I'm not saying this one's more straightforward, but there might be a few practical things that you might want to put into place here that came out of the discussion from earlier on. Any thoughts for actions around this? In fact, Thomas, have you got some of the comments from that might be useful to add in?
Yep, so just from the earlier conversation, we were saying that there's far too much information presented to the board currently, so looking at how we can present this information better. We said that possibly facilitated sessions could take place, focused on reviewing performance. The number of priorities and aims make it difficult to make connections. Potentially need to increase awareness in some areas so that members are able to challenge and ask questions. We just kind of had the discussion there about how performance information is presented. And then we said could look at deep dives or the thematic topics to focus discussion. So yeah, that was the comments from earlier.
Okay, so any thoughts on actions for this one based on your discussions earlier on? Nico?
On the issue around making the information easier to read, I think we should be, I think we generally do this, but plain language, no acronyms unless you've spelt out what the acronym means, and some people and present the same information in at least two different ways. So you get some people like to read a paragraph and they'll get what's being said. Some people prefer to see visuals. So what you're trying to do, and part of that is to do with skills and experience, and part of it is just to do with how your brain's wired. So yeah, present the information in different ways, so that people with different ways of absorbing info have got an idea what it's about.
Thanks for that. What about the discussion around about deeper dives into particular themes? Any thoughts about that as a action for the board?
Well, I mean, you could vary the format of meetings and look for non-traditional methods, be creative about having briefing sessions, having more verbal, going for the more verbal option of sharing information. Yeah, just look at, I mean, we clearly have to have time set aside for decision making, but maybe more for maybe time also for information gathering and sharing and learning as a group, something like that. Just different structures and timings and so forth.
Yeah, under the heading, I suppose, if you're meeting 4 times a year, but beyond that, you might have development days or development afternoons, whatever, just to spend some real time to look at in depth. Michelle?
It would be good to get some feedback on things that we have tried, because we have tried to present information in different ways to the board to support you to be able to get the story from the methodology and the work that's going on and with the project team. So we've tried bringing case studies, we've tried doing visits to projects. So I think sometimes what happens is it's well received initially and then it can feel stale. So I think there's an element of trying to keep the board engaged with the stories, but I guess just that opportunity to hear from you. Well, of the things that we have tried over the last couple of years, what have you enjoyed? What would you want more of? What would you want less of? So again, happy to kind of follow up out with this meeting, but that sort of feedback would be really helpful to us because we'll know what we should continue to try and support and any new ideas. I mean, I think the example of the IGB and what is going on elsewhere that you would want us to try and hear is really helpful as well, because we're as keen as you all to make sure that these are meaningful and engaging sessions.
Yeah, I think thanks for that, Michelle. Also, you know, your point you made earlier on is part of the responsibility of perhaps board members to reflect on, you know, had these types of discussions, what would they think they would want to be doing to further scrutinise things and to get involved more, or what support or training or development, what, you know, help do they need? So perhaps rather than thinking you've got a magic wand, Michelle, to kind of resolve all of that, is for people to have a right good think and come back and give you some genuine feedback and help about what it is you're looking for, the quantity of information, how it's presented, what things have you tried before, is there different ways of doing it, and the timings of receiving it, all of that stuff that can be given to you. So people need to, you know, take responsibility as board members to pass that to yourself. Thank you, and you come.
I would actually say I think the quality of information we get is amazing. It's just an awful lot to kind of plough through. So I think there's a double challenge. And I think what I'd like to see is when we get the updates and we update everything, and it, to be honest, you kind of start losing the sense of, well, what's going really well, what needs further support. So I think and I suppose we're back to the thematic piece. I think we take it as read that we've all waded through all the information, but then I think the challenge is how you then distill something out that we can bring and genuinely spend that first hour of the meeting to discuss and not go through everything, you know. And I think that's the key. And then we say, right, this meeting is going to be about this. If there's anyone got something burning about the other things, then there's an opportunity for a question. But I think that would be just, and then for you might get a better insight in terms of what we need, because I think it's hard both ways. We're all very good at saying what we don't like, then when you ask us what we do like, then that's the challenge. So
Yeah, I think it's that clarity about the themes that you're interested in, because at the minute the information, as I say on the website, is as good as we've seen. But if you're trying to cover all of that and report, whereas if it's narrowed down a little bit, obviously some things need to be reported on, but in terms, but what does the board need to see strategically in terms of, feedback? It doesn't need to see everything and all of this. So, but again, you would need feedback about, well, what does the board want to say? And again, part of the work that you're talking about, looking at the themes and narrowing it, well, that means that you're really interested in seeing the updates on that and the barriers to getting that done. But other stuff, you're less interested. Chair.
Yeah, I think the example is today, for example, when we're forced to not having our normal meeting, asking for members of the board to give us some feedback beforehand when you saw the papers, and me encouraging you to give some feedback afterwards as well. And I think we maybe should go a little bit more vast and getting some feedback at the start and afterwards as well, and seeing if we've got more room during the debate to have, during the meeting, to have that kind of engagement.
Again, with all these things, it's just getting a balance between it. But often when we do the CPP sessions, folk go, this might be the first time we've had a bit of time to discuss things, although we're not actually discussing individual themes. And essentially what people are really saying is, from time to time, we want the time to do a deep dive into some particular areas, but we don't need to go through absolutely everything. But the board needs to give a steer about the areas that it's looking at. Okay, so I think we've got a few actions here. Shall we look at, perhaps, difficult though it is, assigning owners? And it might be you can't decide just now and you need to have a think, but, in the spirit of project management, shall we endeavour to see if we can get an owner for the first one, Thomas, if you can let us know.
Yep. So the first action then was review the information which currently goes to the board. So the quantity, ensuring it's plain English, no acronyms, the way it's presented in terms of using graphs as well as text. So really just kind of review of what currently goes to the board was the first action.
Maybe as a management group, we do that collectively and get around the table and say that. I'll be quite happy to, but showing my hand there, I quite like the way it's presented because I'm quite data driven and there's an accountability piece around that. So, but again, having that discussion there as a precursor.
Okay, thanks for that. And again, I think you're absolutely right about being data driven, and clearly all these tests have changed. You need to have data to show what things are doing. It just sounds like the feeling of the board is maybe just fewer key areas that you're looking at, and that's for yourselves to decide. But second one, Thomas.
I just wonder, because I'm on the same page as Jason, so I think it needs other board members, and I wonder if Michelle can facilitate that conversation. I don't think it's for the management group. But again, I think all of that is the right data and the accountability for it. So I think we need a direction from the board about what you need. So whether that's Michelle can facilitate that conversation with the board members, Barry.
Thank you.
Yep, so just on that point, I did have as a second action, Michelle, your point about having a session either with the board or discussion to gather feedback on what works well and how the board would like information presented. So I've moved that to the first action then, and then as you say, the second action can then be taking that information to review how it's presented currently. So Michelle, I'll just put you down as the owner for the first action.
Okay.
Ah,
Yeah.
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 Yep.
You come?
Yeah, no, thank you. I think one of the things that would be helpful, so I am that sad and I have looked at various boards, just in terms of the volume of information. So there is an evidence base around that. So I'm happy to share some of the intelligent board work, which helps set out how you can focus, because it does overwhelm, because many of us go to multiple meetings in a day, and if each of them have got 400 sheets of A4 to read, it means we don't pay due attention to it, and it undermines the work that you do. So happy to share that with you, Michelle.
Thank you. Move to the third one, Thomas.
Okay, and the final action we had for this one was in terms of the style of meetings. So explore opportunity for different style of meetings or development days. So time set aside for discussions around about sharing learning, deep dives, etc. And then the chair's point about we could provide questions and feedback out with the meeting to free up time for discussion.
Okay, anything, I guess this is again a steer from the board, isn't it, as to what different types of approach they would like to look at particular themes, agreeing what themes they are, how would they like to do it, people with lived experience feeding it, all of that type of thing. So would that be all partners? Or has anyone got a particular lead? In you come.
I think Michelle mentioned that before in terms of that experimentation bits that you've tried before, and maybe feedback from board members about what they liked, what they didn't like, would be a good precursor to that.
And again, just to build on that, I think when we've had workshops, they've been fantastic, haven't they? And I just wonder if it's a balance between the formal meetings and the workshop type ones that we could look at. So I think all the ingredients are there. It's just agreeing how often.
Yeah, and it's also agreeing the key themes because they often lead to lots of interesting things happening. But so it's really important you're picking the key themes that are really feeding into what you're trying to be doing in your LOIP, because what will invariably come out with hearing with people with all sorts of experiences is lots of different bits and pieces of things to be doing and how we're doing and how we're approaching all of that. So it's about being clear what development is a subject. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's the first action.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So we've got an honour for.
Yeah, but it feeds into the other actions.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so without pushing my lot of time is marching on too much, if we can just squeeze one last push for looking to get a measure out for these three. So I'm hoping it, again, the first kind of improvement action was obviously a bit more nebulous and a bit more abstract, a bit more difficult. This one, it might be a little bit more practical. The first one, if you could maybe remind us, Thomas.
Yep, so the first one was that board session discussion to gather feedback on what works well and how the board would like to see information presented.
Okay, so a measure of that, I suppose, would be whatever the output is, that the board is happy that there's a range of different ways. So without over-egging it, would it be something that the board is feeding back, like, a few months down the line that, what we're really pleased with? Or you can reflect on it and think about tweaking or changing, but so feedback, positive feedback from the board around.
Yeah, I think it's just doing a bit of self-reflection. We do it through a number of the groups that we've got. So self-reflection a year. So agreeing what we're going to change and then reflect on how well we did it.
Thank you. Second one, Thomas?
Review the information which currently goes to the board. So again, that might tie in the first one.
With the first one, I suspect, yeah.
And then the third one, the different style of meetings, development days. So again, they'll probably feed into each other.
Beginning to see a pattern here, Thomas, with these ones. Yeah. So it's funny because the first one was a bit kind of broader and more abstract. This one is again, which is fine for self-assessment, very practical thing about when people were asked about the information and what we're spending our time doing and how to get the most out of it. But it's nonetheless useful, I think, for that, particularly if you're having deep dives into areas that you want to get into and you're getting the information back and forward in a way that's much more useful for a variety of the board members. Okay. Right. Well, no one said self-assessment would be easy or or fun. I mean, the truth is it's reflecting on all the tests of change. We've asked you to take time in your busy schedules to think about what's working, where you can, and the board, it's doing well compared to the national figures. Website looks great, lots of things happening, but you have been asked to say what areas we can improve and tweak and change. And, we've got some things to be cracking on with there. So Thomas and I will take this away and kind of write this up into a kind of, as best we can, to pass back to yourselves as a draft improvement plan for yourself to kind of look at and for the board to sign off and take forward. And hopefully it's feeding into a lot of the work that you're doing kind of already anyway, usefully. So Okay, so we got there. So thank you, everyone. This room's getting hotter and hotter, but now we can get some fresh air. So many thanks for everyone's time today.
And thanks very much, Brian Thomas, for coming, especially from down south to help us with that. So I hope it helped you as well on the same time to see what we are doing here in Aberdeen. And I think when we had that kind of conversation with a few members is why did we not do that before? And it's exactly that, having us coming up this afternoon to make understanding a little bit better who we are and what we do. It's very valuable. So thanks again, and don't be strangers. Of course, you're going to come back with us. But any ideas, any share expertise that you think we should have with other community planning boards, we'll be happy to have the information.
Particularly with the national report coming out and the development of the best practice. So there was a couple of bits and pieces there. We'll look to see what we can be passing specifically to your outcome improvement groups and things like that. So many thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, people online.